recite before me on Rosh Hashanah verses that mention kingship, remembrance, and shofarot. So these are the three topics, talking about God being the king, remembrance, we'll see soon, and shofarot. So kingship, why do we talk about kingship? So that you will crown me as king over you. Remembrances, so that your remembrances will rise before me for good. And with what? What will it? With what will the remembrance rise up? With the shofar, b'meh b'shofar. So that's basically the Gemara, and based on that Gemara, we actually have the practice in our Amida. So in the Amida of Rosh Hashanah, so we say Baruch Atah Hashem HaMelech HaKadosh. We say over here. Then after we say HaMelech HaKadosh, we go on to the verses that talk about God being the king. And we say the Aleinu L'Shabeach because there we talk about God being the king. And Hashem Yimloch Le'olam Vad, you see on the bottom of the screen. And we bring verses of Hashem Elok of Imo Utruas Melech Bo, the friendship of a king is with him. And Vahi Bishur Melech, we bring all of these verses of God being the king. We actually bring 10 verses in total. And we finish off, of course, Shema Yisrael is the culmination of the verse speaking about God being the king over the world. We finish off the verse by saying, Baruch Atah Hashem, Melech al Kol Yisrael. He's the king of Melech al Kol Haaretz. He's the king over the entire universe. Mekadesh Yisrael, sanctifies Yisrael on Yom HaZikaron. Then the next blessing, which is the fourth blessing of Musaf of Rosh Hashanah, we go and we say the verses of Zichronot, of remembrances, that our Zikaron, our remembrance should come up before Hashem for the good. How many verses of remembrance do we bring up? 10 verses. So we talk about Vayizkar Elokim Noach, the God remembered Noach. Then we talk about Zacharti lach chesed nurayich. This is the verse in Jeremiah. I think it's Jeremiah. I remember the kindness of your youth, that you came after me, you followed me in a land that was not sown. And then the Torah, a different verse from the prophets. We bring 10 different verses. 3 from the Torah, 3 from Ketuvim, then 3 from Navi, then 1 concluding with Torah, and we finish off Baruch Atah Hashem Zocher Habrit. Then in the next blessing, again, there's 3 blessings in the middle. You have 3 blessings at the beginning of the Amida, 3 blessings at the end, and then Rosh Hashanah Musaf, the only Amida that has 3 blessings in the middle. Then we go to the verses talking about shofarot, about the shofar. And we have, how many verses are brought talking about the shofar? 10, all of them. They have 10 verses, 3 from the Torah, 3 from the Ketuvim, 3 from Navi, and then concluding 1 from the Torah.
Rabbi.
Yes.
Why is it saying Melech HaAretz instead of Melech HaOlam?
I don't know. I'd have to look into that. It's a good question. Olam seems to be more comprehensive, right? Yeah, it's a good question. Then we finish off the final blessing of the middle blessings. Baruch Atah Hashem, Shomea Kol Truat Amo Yisrael, Barachamim. I think that's how we finish it. Shomea Kol Truat Amo Yisrael Barachamim, right? That he listens to the Trua of his nation, Israel Barachamim, with mercy. So these are all of the verses, right? So that we actually do on the Musaf of Rosh Hashanah. Okay. So the Maimer now refers to this teaching of the Talmud, And we continue now on page 5, towards the top of page 5. And what we see here is that it's through the human service that we draw down God's energy into the world to recreate the world, to bring about existence. On Rosh Hashanah, we are drawing down Hashem's power of creation. So the reason why at present the influence associated with Rosh Hashanah must be drawn down through man's service is that at present all godly influence must be drawn down by the divine service of the Jewish people, for the Jews are rooted in the very essence. Thus, the desire and pleasure which they draw down at present is greater than the desire and pleasure drawn down on God's initiative at the beginning of the creation. Wow, that's a pretty amazing statement there. So in other words, God recreating the world this year for 5785 through our work, God is bringing in more godly light, shall we say, even more so than the very first time. Even more so than the very first time, because the very first time it wasn't through the service and the work of the Jewish people. But since it's through the service and work of the Jewish people, the service and work of the Jewish people is rooted in the very divine essence. Therefore, it's even a stronger drawing forth of the divine light. This is a very interesting notion. Let's see how the Rebbe carries it forward. On this basis, explanation is necessary for the shofar of the supernal realms, the inner dimensions of the supernal will, which is drawn down through our divine service using an ordinary shofar, is dependent on our divine service. Yet, the great shofar of the era of redemption will by contrast, be drawn down by God's initiative, independent of an arousal from below. How is this possible when, as explained above, influence which is drawn down by our divine service surpasses influence that is drawn down independently by God's own initiative? So we have here kind of a Talmudic kind of a question. Let's take a look at the whiteboard here. So I don't know how to write text here. There we go. It was just a, there we go. So our original assumption, we'll do it in English so everyone can follow, or as we say in Gemara language, Hava Amina. Our original assumption was that Hashem's
T-I-O-N. Assumption, T-I-O-N.
You're on the ball. I'm so glad you joined us. You know what? My I key is sticking, so it may not show up when I type, but thank you. So our assumption was that Hashem's, let's just call it revelation. Get that I in there, because without I, there is no revelation. So Hashem's revelation on its own is greater, and revelation drawn through our work is a lower level. That makes a lot of sense, right? I mean, that's what we normally intuitively assume. That if it's God's revelation, this is what Chassidic philosophy explains in so many places, that there's the divine revelation that's coming from Hashem himself. It's called Isarusa Dila Ela. It's called the arousal from above. And it's higher than whatever we could produce through our own, causing a revelation coming from that's going to reciprocate our love. Let's put it this way. It's a little bit complicated, but we can understand this. If God's energy is reciprocal, that means that it's reflecting the work that we're doing. We are finite beings. So we would assume that the reciprocal divine light is going to be lower than the divine light that is coming from Hashem's revelation in and of itself. Hashem's revelation, not dependent upon our work, is going to be a much higher level. That was our original assumption, right? That's what we'd assume. And it's a proper assumption, grounded in a lot of what's discussed in Chassidus and Kabbalistic study. And based on that, so now, this is going to be so what the great shofar, what's the great shofar? Is going to be taka, it's blown on its own. The great shofar not reciprocal, right? Not based on our work. And that's why it's going to be on a higher level as opposed to our regular shofar, which is the work that we do. This is our regular assumption. This is what we'd normally think. But now the Rebbe just explained to us that in fact, if it's coming from the work of the Jewish people, it's on a much higher level because the desire that God had for the Jewish people is rooted in the divine essence. And there's nothing higher than that. Let's just assume that for a moment. So now what we're saying is, now let's go into the writing mode. So now we're saying, whoops, let's change the color so we can see this. So now we're Hashem's, what Hashem does on his own, really can't really write with this for a laptop, is not greater. Rather, whatever is revelation drawn through our own work on a lower level is actually greater. This is what the Rebbe is putting forth in the Mimer. So that creates a question now on our idea of the Shofar Gadol. The Shofar Gadol is seemingly not so Gadol anymore. That's what the Rebbe is asking. Let's not worry about it so much. Let's go see how the Rebbe answers it and uncovers a deeper component. So the Mimer from Likutei Torah, that's from the Alter Rebbe, explains that the sounding of the great shofar in the era of redemption resembles the sounding of the shofar in the present era, because mitzvahs will not be nullified in the era of redemption. Indeed, their influence will be enhanced, and the sounding of the shofar will be on the level of the great shofar. So when we blow shofar, when Mashiach comes and we blow shofar, even on Rosh Hashanah, that's going to be similar to the great shofar. I'm not sure exactly what that means, but let's see where the Rebbe is going with this in the next paragraph. it is possible to explain that the source for the concept of the sounding of the great shofar relates to the sounding of the shofar in Rosh Hashanah is dependent on the passage from the Talmud explaining the rationale for the opinion of Rabbi Yeshua, who maintains that the Jews will be redeemed in Tishrei. Okay. So there's an argument in the Talmud basically between Rabbi Eliezer and Rabbi Yehoshua. Rabbi Eliezer said that the Jewish people were redeemed in Nisan, and they will be in the future redeemed in Nisan. Rabbi Yehoshua, he argued that the Jewish people were redeemed in Nisan, indeed, that's history, but they will be redeemed in the future in Tishrei. Okay, so this is a Talmudic argument. So the idea that the blowing of the shofar, but what we do you see why this Talmudic point is relevant to what we're discussing here? Can anybody get where we're going? Is that apparently the final redemption, which according to Rabbi Yeshua is going to be in Tishrei, it has an association with shofar, right? So he's saying we're going to be redeemed in Tishrei. So we see the shofar that we blow in Tishrei, the first day of Tishrei, was associated with the redemption. The redemption, of course, there's also going to be the blowing of the great shofar. So his is dependent on an association between the two verses mentioning the sounding of the shofar. It says, sound the shofar on the new moon. Tikkun Kodesh shofar. And Bayomahu Yitaka b'shofar gadol. On that day, a great shofar will be sounded. This is so we make a comparison between these two. Just like it says, on that day, a great shofar will be sounded. And we also say tiku shofar, sound a shofar on the new moon, which that's the text for which we blow the shofar on Rosh Hashanah. So Rabbi Yeshua makes that association between the sounding of the great shofar. This association, however, raises several questions with regard to the concepts mentioned above that are stated in the Maimarim referred to previously. For example, we're going to go into some technical questions here. If we get them, that's fine. If we don't totally get it, it's all right. We're gonna continue. So it was explained from the Mittler Rebbe, the form conjunction used placing a kamatz in the word yitaka implies the shofar will be sounded on its own accord without any arousal from below, right? So we have to be familiar with this concept here, that what we're talking about, one of the underlying themes of this mimer is the whole idea of there's the way that through our work, we draw down an arousal, or shall we say a divine light from above, a reciprocal kind of a thing. Yes? That's called isarusa de la sata, isarusa de la ela. There's an arousal from below, and then God reciprocates with an arousal from above. And just by way of analogy to understand what we're talking about, when you have people who love each other, right? So the way the relationship works is that there's always one person who will initiate that love relationship. One person will say something or do something, right? And then the other person responds and reacts and likewise, right? In kind. And that's how a relationship works. You know, there's not like they say and do everything at the same time. One person initiates, and then the other person responds. That's a good thing. It's a good relationship. You reach out, there's a friend that you miss, you call him up, you say, how are you doing, right? Then when it comes to your birthday, he says, yes, I'm going to call him back and see how he's doing, right? So there's an initiation and a response. And that's what we're talking about here. So with our relationship with God, there's the initiation response kind of relationship on the one hand, but then there is the way that God does it without any human work at all, which is a much higher level. Okay, and I'm repeating this idea because it's a little bit of an esoteric concept, but this is what the mimer is talking about. So when we're talking about the shofar being without anything from below, we're talking about a very high level. When we said Yitaka b'shofar gadol, it's going to be blown on its own. There was no work involved with that. And that's a very high level of Yitaka, without any arousal from below. This appears to run contrary to the spiritual thrust of Rosh Hashanah, which places a fundamental emphasis on man's divine service. Okay, so the basic question here is that Rosh Hashanah seems to be associated with the human service. If you want to say redemption is God doing it on its own, that I understand, but to compare the final redemption with Rosh Hashanah, they seem to be apples and oranges. Rosh Hashanah is about man's divine service. This relates to the explanation given in several sources why Rosh Hashanah is celebrated on the 1st of Tishrei, although the world was created on the 25th of Elul, right? We celebrate the day of the creation of the human being, not the creation of light and dark and the earth and vegetation and all of those things and the heavens and the stars and sun and moon, right? Those things were created various days of creation. It was the human being that was created on the 6th day of creation, but that is Rosh Hashanah. That is Aleph Tishrei, okay? And that is the day of Rosh Hashanah. Why? Because it's about the work of the human being. It's about the responsibility, the work, the involvement, right? That's what Rosh Hashanah is all about. It's not about just from above. It's about our work. So the question that I was asking is, that's what Rosh Hashanah is about. Why are we mixing apples and oranges and saying, that's like the great shofar of the time of redemption? The Rebbe says, no, it's not like that at all. The great shofar of redemption was something that happened on its own. Rosh Hashanah is through human work, specifically. Seemingly, of course, the Rebbe is going to answer all of this. Seemingly, since the sounding of the great shofar relates to the sounding of the shofar on the new moon, again, great shofar being redemption, the new moon being what we're going to blow a week from Thursday on Rosh Hashanah. So on the new moon, that is Rosh Hashanah and Tishrei, it would appear that this quality should be drawn down by the service of the Jewish people. Nevertheless, the Maimorim, the discourses upon which this is all based, explain that the word Yitaka implies that the influence will be drawn down on his own initiative without any arousal from above at all. So that's one problem. One problem is, again, mixing apples and oranges. Geula seems to be from above, from top down, in a good way, a great revelation from Hashem, not limited by human tampering, human involvement. Whereas our blowing of the shofar on Rosh Hashanah is specifically defined by human involvement. That, in fact, is the very day that we celebrate Rosh Hashanah as the day of the creation of the human being, because it's about the human being being placed in the Garden of Eden, la'avda l'shamra, to work it and to guard it. It's all about the work that the human being is meant to do. So they seem to be incongruous, right? Redemption, the great shofar of redemption, and the shofar that we blow on Rosh Hashanah, they seem to be incongruous. Or, if you prefer, apples and oranges. Here's another question. All of the concepts taught by the Torah are hora'os, points of instruction in our daily life of how we are meant to be and how we are meant to act, that provide us with direction in our own divine service. What instruction and direction in our divine service can we gain from the idea of the great shofar that will be sounded on God's initiative without any requirement from the arousal from below? It seems very much top down. It's all Hashem. Okay, what's my lesson in that? What am I supposed to take from that? Don't do anything? That doesn't seem to be a very useful lesson. Okay, so we have two questions. So all of these questions are based on our equating the shofar gadol, the great shofar, with the shofar that we blow on Rosh Hashanah. That, and we're connecting that with Rabbi Yeshua, who said that we will be redeemed in the month of Tishrei. So we have the idea of the shofar gadol and our shofar of Rosh Hashanah kind of being in the same month now. But the Rebbe's questions, they seem to be incongruous. One is from above, without our work. Rosh Hashanah, on the other hand, seems to be totally about our work. Question number two is, anybody remember question two? Speak up. A simpler question. Don't be shy now. Question number two is, what is the lesson for us in the shofar gadol? Okay, Hashem blows a shofar, it's done on its own. But what is our, everything in Torah is meant to be a lesson for us. So there has to be something, yes. There has to be some lesson for us and all. Okay. All right. Now for the answer. And we're going to bring the answer based on the teachings of the Rebbe Maharash, the fourth Chabad Rebbe. Oftentimes, the Rebbe in his Maimarim would weave in all of the Chabad Rebbes. And like I mentioned above in the previous class, that this is the way of drawing all of the Rebbes into this experience here. So what I mean to say is, there's a point the Rebbe Maharash is making, but as much as there's a point that he's making, the Rebbe could have brought that point from a different Rebbe, but the Rebbe wants to invite, so to speak, each of the Rebbes into this Rosh Hashanah discourse. As we're starting off a new year in Rosh Hashanah, so the Rebbe would draw in all of the Rebbes to draw in their presence and to draw in their blessings. So far we've had the Alter Rebbe, we've had the Mittler Rebbe, we've had the Tzemach Tzedek, and now we're going to resolve all of this with something from the Rebbe Maharash. The above questions can be resolved based on the explanations given in the Maimarim of the Rebbe Maharash with regard to the concept that one side of the shofar is narrow and the other side is wide. You may have noticed that this recalls the verse, Min hametzar karasi yudke. Out of the straits I call to you, O God. Anani bamerchav yudke. Do we get that reference? Maybe if let's find a shofar. So it's very interesting. You can't widen the mouthpiece and make narrow the wide part of the shofar. You say, well, but it's actually, it has to be just so. I'm trying to get a
you can't blow it backwards. You try to put it in your mouth the other way, it doesn't work.
Right, but I'm saying you can't blow it backwards because there's no way to get the sound from the shofar from the big aperture. But what if you'd heat it up and minimize that, right? That's also prohibited, is what halacha says.
I don't think so.
Huh?
I don't think so.
You don't think what? That it's prohibited?
No. That it would be okay.
Right. You don't think so. Don't try it at home, right?
Don't mix it.
Okay. Just to, this is the kind of, I'm just trying to share this idea, the beautiful idea of this pasuk, and the idea is that min hametzar. So follow the button here. Follow the min hametzar is from this. The metzar. What is the metzar?
The narrowest point.
Right. My things are just not working here, and it's just a little frustrating. I apologize.
I'm not working. I apologize too.
You're not working. I'm
No,
working.
just episode today, but that's
All
okay.
right. That's okay.
And I'm sure that applies to a lot of people here. Nobody's fighting with you. It's just
Right. I know. Everyone's just going along with it.
we don't have a crowd that has kayach to fight.
Oh my goodness. Oh my goodness.
Good. It's good. It's all being absorbed.
All right. So here we go. We have the large part. We have the large part of the shofar, the opening, right? That's called min hamerchav. So min hametzar karasi is the small part. It's like nothing is working here. Yeah, you're not working. I know. Okay, forget it. Stop share. I can't do things on the computer because the things just don't work with the Zoom and whatever. Or it's the connection. It's all right. It's no big deal. Oh, you know what? I have a shofar. I don't have to show you on the computer. I don't have to get an image. I have one right here. Okay, so min hametzar karasi ka, from the straits, from the narrow. This is the narrow part, right? And when you put a sound into there, you can't blow into a shofar. If you blow into a shofar, you're just going to get air. That's not a sound of a shofar. You have to you have to purse your lips and blow what they call a raspberry, meaning you have to let the air out of the most narrowest part of your mouth. That's how you get the sound of the shofar. So min hametzar, it has to be from the narrows. I call out to you, Anani, God, answer me, min hamerchav, from the wide, from the sound of the shofar goes to the wide opening of the shofar. So that's the meaning of the verse according to the Rebbe Maharash. So this recalls the verse, out of the straits I call you, O God. Hashem answered me with abounding mercy. That's min hamerchav. Well, Hashem answered me with abounding min hamerchav. He answered me, really, the correct translations, he answered me from the merchav. The merchav is the wide opening. So that's the shofar. That's talking about the shofar. In fact, we say this verse before the blowing of the shofar. When you'll be in synagogue on Thursday, God willing, before the blowing of the shofar, we recite various verses. One of them is min hametzar karasi ka, anani b'merchav ka. So the Rebbe Marash explains that both of the concepts reflect a sequence of causation. With regard to the shofar blasts, it is because the air blown comes out from the narrow and the portion of the shofar that it resounds powerfully as it expands and spreads out from the wider portion. Okay? Physics. That's physics, right? You know where you also have this? With a garden hose. If you have the water shooting out of the garden hose, it's going to go out, kacha, kacha. It's going to go out regular. But if you put your finger on it and you constrict the flow, then it's going to shoot much further, right? It's going to go out much further. So through constriction and through the narrowness, that is what's going to cause something to become much wider and broader. These are the laws of physics. Okay. So it's coming out from the short end, and specifically from blowing in the mouth, from the smallest amount of air coming through our lips, that's how it can come out in the broadest way.
No,
So-
that's how it goes in. The narrowest way is how it goes in.
Yes, and then it comes
Comes
out in the
out from the
widest.
widest way.
Comes
Now,
out
let me just see this.
Okay.
The Goyim have an image also. I guess you would call it a meme, usually used around Thanksgiving to show God's gift and graciousness in the form of an overflowing, not a horn of some kind, but something like that from a plant or.
It's a horn. It's called the horn of plenty, the corn you cook.
Right.
Yeah.
Is that a connection? Is this right? Is this connected in any way to anything Yiddish or?
I couldn't tell you. I don't know.
Okay.
I don't know what the source.
Because there was also the goodness coming from the widest point.
Right.
All right.
Okay.
Shkayach.
So now we're going to go from the physical to the spiritual application. So too in the spiritual parallel, when a person cries out because of the difficulty and constraints, out of the straits I call to you, O God, he can be assured that Hashem answered me with abounding mercy in a very broad way. Right? Anani b'merchav. That God will answer me with the broadness of Hashem. So the Rebbe Marash continues to explain that the same motif is if reflected in the statement of our sages. A year which is meager at the outset will become bountiful at its conclusion. But following the same theme, right? Meager at the outset does not necessarily refer to actual poverty. Instead, it refers to the manner in which the Jewish people come on Rosh Hashanah, like the poverty-stricken, and approach Hashem with supplication and prayer. As it said, a poor man will speak in a supplicatory note. This is calling from the straits, right? So we should approach Hashem realizing that we have nothing. Even if a person has, but we're coming to Hashem like a poor man, where we have nothing. And this leads to it becoming bountiful at its conclusion. God answered me b'mercha, in a broad way. Developing this theme, the Rebbe Marash's mimer explains that the advantage of prayer of a poor man over the prayer of a rich man, it's possible to explain that there are two advantages to the prayer of a poor man. The first is reflect on the teachings of Baal Shem Tov on the verse, Tefillah la'ani, a prayer of the poor man, Kiyatov, when he faints, or when he wraps himself in prayer. And before Hashem, he pours out his supplication. Moreover, the prayer of a poor man is more acceptable, and furthermore, with regard to the satisfaction of the person concerning the influence drawn down because of prayer, the satisfaction of a poor man is very great, as explained in the teaching of the Maggid of Mezrich, quoted in that mimer. Let's see where the Rebbe is driving to here. On this basis, we can explain the connection of the great shofar to Rosh Hashanah. The reason that in the era of redemption, the great shofar will be sounded to arouse those who are lost and those who are banished, is that those who are lost and those who are banished are in the most difficult straits. Their existence in such difficult circumstances arouses and draws down the sounding of the great shofar. Influence from the hiddenmost levels, that is the most abounding relief. So what we're saying here is that in fact, even the great shofar, it's not just happening in a vacuum. We're talking about the great shofars to summon those people who are the furthest away. And their spiritual circumstances definitely in a situation of difficulty. So their existence in such difficult circumstances arouse and draws down the sounding of the great shofar. Thus, sounding the great shofar relates to Rosh Hashanah. We say sound the shofar on the new moon. For Rosh Hashanah reflects the motif of being meager at the outset to ultimately becoming blessed with wealth. Indeed, this is reflected in the manner in which the word Reshis is written in the Torah, without an aleph, so that it includes the word Rush, a poor man. Okay, interesting. Just another added point. It says that the eyes of Hashem are upon the land of Israel. Indeed, we'll take we'll apply that very practically, that the eyes of Hashem are upon the physical land of Israel. They should be right now and bring total success in Israel to vanquish our enemies and to, and all of our population, all of the soldiers should all be tremendously safe through this amazing divine blessing, for his eyes are upon the land. But it says they're upon the land from the beginning of the year. So it says Reshis, the beginning of the year, but it doesn't spell Reshis the normal way, which would be Resh Aleph Shin. It spells Reshis, Resh Shin Yud Saf, as you see here on the screen. So Reshis, okay, well, in the Torah, right, it's missing a letter, it's chaser, but it's still, we read it the same way. But Reshis means rush. Rush means a poor person. So it's written without an aleph to indicate this poor person, that we approach the year realizing that we have absolutely nothing. And we're coming to Hashem to supplicate to Hashem of having nothing. And the Rebbe is drawing a connection between that and the idea of the great shofar is also arousing the Jewish person who's far, far away, who's lost in Assyria or in the land of Egypt. And that great shofar is meant to summons them. And that's the connection to Rosh Hashanah, because we are also coming in a way that we're totally lost, and we just are supplicating Hashem, meaning that we make ourselves totally reliant on Hashem's kindness to give us life, to give us health, to give us parnasa, success. So it is possible to explain that the sounding of the great shofar to arouse those who are lost in the land of Ashur and those who are banished in the land of Egypt, again, the opening verse of our mimer, that's the following of the great shofar, will elevate those lands themselves. Why were the Jews exiled to these foreign countries, becoming lost and banished? To bring about the redemption, so that the straits of exile, in particular, the difficulties experienced by those who are lost and banished, will arouse and draw down the sounding of the great shofar. Excuse me. In other words, they're there so that the fact that they are so far away will arouse the sounding of the great shofar. Through this, the Jews will be elevated to a level that surpasses the spiritual heights that they had reached before they were exiled. Therefore, when the great shofar is sounded and the exiles will return, the intent for which the lands of Ashur and Egypt were created will be constantly realized. And so those lands themselves will be elevated. Wow, this is really some quite amazing ideas that the Rebbe is bringing forth here. So the whole fact that Jews are in exile is so that they should feel far away, and maybe they don't even feel far away, but their farness from their Father in heaven causes Hashem to blow the great shofar. In other words, what calls out the greatest, mercy, Rahmanis, Hashem's Rahmanis on us is really the deepest, most profound quality of Hashem. We call it the 13 attributes of mercy, which transcend all other levels. Now, on the one hand, we say, well, let's live a life as the Jewish people, that we never need to call on Hashem's mercies. Well, we know that's not the case.
And that's the snake.
That's the snake, exactly, right? The whole purpose why exile exists, why Assyria exists, and why Egypt exists, is so the Jews should find themselves so far away that we must call on the divine mercy. And when we call on the divine mercy, that great shofar blows, everybody is.
But Rebbe, it's not just calling out for mercy. As with anything, and this is really intense, as with anything as Hashem expects from us, it's with complete dedication and sincerity, at that moment at least. But the point of Yitzias Mitzrayim that triggered all the miracles, I understood, was by Yizaku.
Right.
That was the word that we got to a point where we literally just screamed out to Hashem. We knew there was no one else in the world we could talk to. We knew there was nobody else we can call. We didn't care what the neighbors said or the family said, looking at each other, watching us, pleading. It was just a gut-wrenching, full-throated screaming. Like I used to say in law, when I saw them coming at me from all directions, if I didn't know which direction to turn, I looked up. That was the way to turn, because there were no other directions.
Sure. However, in this particular pasuk, it seems to be, and based on what the Rebbe is saying here, although with going out of Egypt you are correct, with this final redemption, it seems that the Ovdim and the Nidachim are not calling out. It's in this case, it is Yitzchok. Hashem himself is calling on his mercy to affect these disaffected people. And when
Baruch Hashem, I mean, that's the point of we get undeserved
right
grace.
Right. That's what it's. That's what and what calls out that great level is the fact that you have Jews that are so forlorn. Sometimes we look at these Jews and we say, how are they part of the Jewish people? What the Rebbe is explaining here, they're part of the Jewish people because they call out the greatest Rahmanis from Hashem, and through that they end up elevating Assyria and Egypt and London and Fort Lauderdale and Minneapolis. All of these cities, every place becomes elevated. Based on the above, we can also appreciate another dimension of the connection between the sounding of the great shofar and Rosh Hashanah. Rosh Hashanah involves two aspects. It is, on the one hand, anniversary of man's creation. And as will be explained, it also elevates the world at large. So there's two things working in tandem here. We have the human being, but we also have the universe. This concept can be explained based on the Maimarim of the Rebbe Rashab, right? I told you that the Rebbe is weaving in all of the Rebbes here. So now he's weaving in. So until now we've been explaining the teachings of the Rebbe Marash. The Rebbe Marash was succeeded by his middle son, whose name was Reb Shalom Ber, the Rebbe Rashab. So the Rebbe, this concept can be explained based on the Maimarim of the Rebbe Rashab entitled Zeh Hayom Tchilas Maisecha. These Maimarim focus on the phrase, this day is the beginning of your acts of remembrance of the first day. Right? So this is again, we brought here in the Maimar. This is a common theme discussed in Chassidus, this particular line that we take from the Tefillah. We say in the Tefillah, after we blow the shofar, we say, Zeh hayom techilas masecha. This is the day that is the beginning of your work. Zikaron, it is a remembrance to the first day. There's so many different ways of understanding what that verse is talking about. But the Rebbe Rashab asks some questions on this. Let's see what he asks. And he asks a fundamental question. Rosh Hashanah, this day that we're celebrating, is the first day of Tishrei, the sixth day of creation. Why then? Is it a remembrance to the first day? So here we're looking at the first day as being the Sunday of creation. So why should it be a remembrance? If the whole thing is about the sixth day of creation, what do we want to remember about the first day of creation? And if it's the first day of creation, well, let's celebrate that. In resolution, the Rebbe Rashab explains that the desire for the creation of the world represents the external dimension of God's will. The inner dimension of God's desire is focused on the Jewish people. So we've spoken about this idea before, that we have the internal and the external will. The external will is what you want to do so that you can have what you really want to have. So a person goes to work. A person wants to go to work so that they can earn money, so they can support their family, so they can be with their family in a supportive and loving way. So the will to go to work is ideally an external will, and the will to be with your family is the internal will. And so creating the world is God's external will. God's the internal dimension of God's will is what? On the Jewish people. Every year, both of these dimensions are manifest. 25th of Elul and on Rosh Hashanah respectively. So in other words, the Rebbe Rashab now explains that we have the Sunday paradigm and the Friday paradigm. The Sunday paradigm is the creation of existence. That's the beginning of the creation of existence. And the Friday paradigm is the existence of the human being, which is again representing the Jewish people. And both of these are represented here in what we're talking about. So both of these dimensions are manifest on Rosh Hashanah, on the 25th of Elul, and on Rosh Hashanah respectively. On the 25th of Elul, the anniversary of the creation of the world, God's external desires manifest. And on Rosh Hashanah, the first of Tishrei, the anniversary of the creation of man, which is ultimately referring to the Jewish people, that is the manifestation of God's internal desire. On this basis, we can understand the quote, "This day is the beginning of your act in remembrance of the first day. For on Rosh Hashanah, there are two spiritual thrusts. A, the fundamental dimension of Rosh Hashanah, that is the beginning of your acts, drawing down the essence of the Or Ein Sof, the God's infinite light, which transcends the desire for all the worlds. And B, that it's the remembrance of the first day that drawing down the essence of the Or Ein Sof also draws down the desire for the worlds, and thus the energy, life force for the world's actual existence. Accordingly, the connection between the sounding of the shofar and Rosh Hashanah is reflected in both dimensions. Again, the world and the Jewish people. The essence of the revelation of the great shofar, which is drawn down to the Jewish people, relates to the beginning of your acts. And that's Rosh Hashanah, the Friday. The elevation which this brings about within the lands of Ashur and Egypt, by contrast, this relates to the remembrance of the first day, meaning that the world itself is also affected and impacted and elevated. Okay, so this is all a bit of a heady concept. But what we have here is the point is that on Rosh Hashanah we are ushering in Hashem's light for bringing about the world, and for bringing specifically about the relationship with the Jewish people that's now made possible through the creation of this world. And both of these elements are reflected in the blowing of the shofar. And so far we have teachings from the Alter Rebbe, from the Mittler Rebbe, from the Tzemach Tzedek, from the Rebbe Maharash, and from the Rebbe Rashab. Right? We're just missing a teaching from the previous Rebbe, the Rebbe's father-in-law. So I'm sure there's going to be another question brought up, and it's going to be clarified with the teaching from the Rebbe, from the previous Rebbe, from my father-in-law. So we'll have to wait. It might not be. We just have a couple minutes left. So a connection with these concepts can be drawn to the concept from the Mimer of the Rebbe Marash cited previously. I'm sorry, what?
Oh, I thought you were frozen.
Oh, all right. So a connection with these. So let's connect this with something that the Rebbe Marash said previously, that the straits of the shofar refer to the concept of a year being meager at its outset. We spoke about that being the idea of poverty, that we start off realizing that we have nothing. We just rely on Hashem. And as mentioned previously, this meagerness does not mean lacking of divine blessing, but rather we present ourselves as poor on Rosh Hashanah. That is, their self-image is permeated with humility. We may thus conclude that even when the straits are produced by a person's own feeling of bittul, in other words, our own feeling of egolessness, this is sufficient to draw down God's abounding mercies. This refers to an instance when the person's divine service is complete, but his feeling of bittul, of he has no ego whatsoever, causes him to feel constrained. He feels like egoless because he's totally without ego, and he feels constrained by this. I'm not sure. This sense of constraint is sufficient to draw down Hashem's abounding mercy. I'm not sure exactly what this means. Let's see if the Rebbe explains it. I mean, there's a certain level of bittul. There's many different levels of bittul that are described in Chassidus. At a lower level of bittul, you feel that you are putting, like, let's put it this way. If somebody, your wife asks you to do something and you don't want to do it, you put yourself aside and you do what she asks you to do, but you feel constrained, right? You can't be your own person. You can't do your own thing because you have to, make your wife happy. And this is, good way to live. Happy wife, happy life. But you could feel a little constrained. I can't do my own thing. I can't do what I want. I can't, so a person can feel constrained on a lower level of bittul. Similar concepts apply with regard to the revelation of the great shofar, which will be prompted and drawn down by the constraints felt by those who are lost and those who are banished. This can be interpreted as referring to a state where the person's divine service is perfect, yet he feels himself poor, because he meditates on the concepts that, compared to the magnificence of the Or Ein Sof, even the most genuine consummate divine service is considered as sin. Therefore, regardless of this individual perfection, the person considers himself as lost and banished, and this arouses the revelation of the great shofar. Okay, we'll continue with this, God willing, next time. Here the Rebbe is connecting it with the idea of not people who are lost, but people who make themselves their services inadequate. So even though their service might not be inadequate, but they make themselves as if they are lost and forsaken, because what is my service worth? They think based on, Hashem is infinite, and what is my little meager work worth compared to Hashem? And so they consider themselves inadequate. And these are the people that are lost and forsaken. So even that feeling of being lost and forsaken in this positive sense can arouse Hashem's mercy to take you out from there, and I guess you should realize how special you are in your service of Hashem. We'll see where this is going. It's getting a little complicated. We'll continue, God willing, next Tuesday, which will we'll continue next Tuesday. And maybe we'll finish the mimer. We'll see if we can kind of condense some of the points, or we'll continue for another week or another 2 weeks. All right. Thank you all for joining.
Thank you, Rebbe.
Thank you, Rabbi.
You're welcome.